Hey everybody, how you doing? Tom Barnas here. Stories from the 78. And since I've been a kid, I've been fascinated by the architecture in the city. Before I even knew what that really meant, when you take a ride with your parents and you go to your grandma's house, turns out my grandma's house was in the little village neighborhood right off of California, like 27th Street. Those houses much different than my other grandma's house that was at 51st and Austin in the Garfield Ridge neighborhood. I didn't know why I found it fascinating. I just did. And all these years later, by hopping on the orange line when I was a kid and taking the train up to Wrigley off the red line, the Addison stop, you would see all these different kinds of houses that had the sidewalks halfway up the house, or houses that were walk up, or houses that had big colonnades out in front. I mean, all different kinds. And that is why I'm so excited to talk about this fantastic new book. It is called Chicago Homes. Look at that right there. It's all the reasons why the houses look the way that they look. There's more than just the Chicago bungalow. I'm going to talk to Carla and Phil, who put this book together. There's amazing illustrations in this book of different kinds of houses, architecture, and why things are the way they are. So I welcome them both now to this episode of Stories from the 78. Carla and Phil, how you doing?
Good.
Yeah, doing well.
They got away from me, but good otherwise. Yes.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking time to chat with me this afternoon about your book, Chicago Homes. And I found the book when I first saw it came out like late last year, right? About October of 25.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I've been fascinated with it ever since, just because it is like a book made for somebody like me I'm a giant Chicago nerd, and I love to learn why things are the way they are. And as a kid growing up, I'd always wonder that without even realizing why I was wondering it. And your book put so much of it into context as far as why you go to one neighborhood and it looks like the houses look like, the sidewalks halfway up the house, right? As far as when you're looking at it from the street, and then other neighborhoods, you look down and they're all workers' cottages and stuff like that. There's a reason and purpose for all of it. And you guys kind of put it all into this beautiful book with these amazing drawings. And I'm so glad to talk to you guys about it. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So the instrument, Phil, we were talking about this prior, that kind of got this whole thing started as far as the plat of surveys people get for their little, their piece of Chicago property that has roots going way back, right?
Yeah, that goes back to James Thompson, the original surveyor in 1830. And he was commissioned by, I think it was called the Canal Commission, to basically like plat out the city, or what was then to be a town.
Right.
And to because what they wanted to do was parcel off the lands in order to sell it to raise money for the canal that had been planned there. So the canal had kind of been a dream for like a long time, since that part of the world was like originally explored by the French. They thought, okay, this is a great place for connecting the waterways of the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River system. Because at the time, of course, the way to get around inland was all by boat, unless you were like on horse or walking. But
sure,
there were no rails or anything like that. And so that kind of incipient dream kind of was passed to the very new United States. And the state of Illinois created this commission, and he platted it out, and he used some of the conventions that were then kind of popular in like that part of the country to basically create this grid-like pattern to parcel off the lands, and then to raise the money for the canal, which would open in 1848. But a lot of the kind of measurements were basically from the tool that he was using, which was called the Gunter's chain. And so I believe it was 16 feet. It's kind of like, it's like kind of a long, it's a surveyor's chain with like these little kind of pieces to them that kind of roll out. But that kind of chain and like the lengths kind of dictated like how the city would look. And that kind of reverberated to the grid-like pattern that we have today in the modern city of Chicago.
Yeah, that blows my mind that it was divided up that way to sell, but it makes
Mm.
sense when you think about it. A grid, it's easier to sell a grid than, like neighborhoods that, like Norwood Park Circle. That is not a grid. That's very windy streets, but and that also wasn't part of Chicago when it was first developed.
Mhm.
Either. So
Right.
it's fascinating to hear that. I think people don't realize that back then people had to go do that work that now, lasers can do and things like that
Right.
with like a chain. But that chain and the length of it,
Mm.
um, Carla, if you could, is that has to do a lot with the way the lots are in our city, the streets, the alleys. I mean, all of that ties all the way back to that.
Mm.
It does, yeah. I can't remember exactly how that sort of played out, but I know the length of the Gunter chain, it was like this many lengths is like a street length as well. It's this many lengths to get to the sidewalk, and then from the sidewalk. So it was all like a riff on those measurements. And part of, what we really wanted to do with this book was talk about how, like, why do Chicago homes look like Chicago homes? Like, how are
Yeah.
they different from homes anywhere else in the country? And they are different. And part of it is because of those measurements of the lots, those long, narrow lots. We essentially take a style that's sort of trending across the country at the time, and you have to like smash it onto the lot size that you have, right? So some of these were like these sort of sprawling pastoral like styles, like bungalows, for example, and we sort of like mash it onto this long, narrow lot with a short front, and so that alone really dramatically changes the look of something, obviously.
Hmm.
If I were smashed into a long rectangle shape, or a circle shape or something, I would presumably look quite different than somebody smashed into a square. So,
Mhm.
so yeah, all of that really, set a bit of a tone. Of course, materials and stuff that are available as well. It's a really big part of it.
Yeah.
The immigration patterns and who's coming in to work on things. You can kind of walk down a street and be like, oh, I bet the Dutch settled here, once you sort of know more what you're looking at. But those kinds of things, we really tried to break down, beginning with just the lots and explain what are the social, political, racial, economic factors that shape housing as well, and fire codes and sort of in all of it, So these really tangible things like a chain, all the way to these huge social things that were going on across the world.
And Chicago definitely has a lot to do with a lot of social change that happened, with all of I've been doing like research on different neighborhoods in the city and all of the unions, the history of
Yeah.
unions and, the strikes that happen and what happened as a result of those strikes, like down in Pullman or in the Haymarket, right? There's all
Right.
these reasons why we have things like Labor Day in our country. That's all coming out of Chicago. So it's fascinating to hear when the way that our lots were sized is how they dictated what was popular to smash in. It's so Chicago in a way. Like, no, no, no. This is the lot you have to use. So you're going to take your fancy architecture and you're going to make it work in these lots. That's kind of
Exactly.
essentially what
Suck
happened.
it up.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I think the other thing that's cool about the kind of original layout of Chicago in 1830 is, James Thompson kind of also allowed for alleys, and that became a convention that would be, repeated throughout, Chicago, basically edge to edge. And that's, I think, one of the things that people like treasure about Chicago is like having the alleys for functional purposes, for transit, for deliveries and things like that, a place to keep your trash. So yeah, a lot of stuff just kind of has these ripple effects.
Not only to removal of trash and everything else, and a good solid garage party, right? Like
Oh yeah.
you can't be in
Yeah.
Chicago without somebody having the party door, is that what they're called, that opens up to your backyard. Or if you're
Right.
getting crazy and you got a whole block, I've been to a block party where it's in the alley, not actually on the block, because
Mhm.
it's very Chicago. But
Hmm.
um,
Yeah,
and I
that's
imagine
something I
you,
appreciate too, kind of having moved out to the Northeast, not having alleys and just seeing all the chaos that kind of spills on the street is just, it's untidy.
yeah,
Hmm.
right. I think that's something that Chicago doesn't get enough credit for as far as big cities go. I mean, you always hear the comparison about garbage in New York City piled up. That's about it. But there's so much more to it. I, this reminds me of a story that I remembered from years ago, and maybe you guys have heard of this story. And it's about the owner, McCormick of the Chicago Tribune, and Wrigley across the way, right? And they had Michigan Avenue, and they were upset with all the chaos in front of their buildings on Michigan Avenue, and that is why. Legend has it, or the story I've been told, that is why Michigan Avenue is two levels. They basically raised up the one level so that all the people could be on that level, and then the bottom level of Michigan Avenue was to be for all the trucks to load in, so it wouldn't mess up the beautiful Michigan Avenue. I don't know if you ever heard that story, but that's what I've been told.
But I'm not surprised.
We
Yeah,
have
great
been
story.
such a layered and complicated transportation and shipping history in the city, because we had boats coming in and bringing things in underground as well, and in all of these like sort of chambers in these buildings that you wouldn't know, or sort of containing all of these containers of things. You've got rail, you've got cars, you've got I mean transportation was a really interesting thing to research in general with this book too, because everything was sort of slamming together at a certain point in terms of how things were designed. And we had the electric streetcars, we had cable cars still, even though we had electric streetcars. We had the L around the turn of the last century already coming, laid out in certain areas. We had pedestrians, we had like a bicycling craze, and we had people on horses still too, because we had the stockyards and all of this leather. So we were like saddle central. So we kind of kept the horses around longer than we needed to. And that's part of it, so all of this sort of like spaghettiing together into these just, you can imagine how many people were sort of plowed over by one thing or another. And they really were. So then you had like sidewalk commissions coming in who were like super hardcore. I mean, it was really, really interesting just how all of that infrastructure was created.
That is
one of the kind of coolest things that I remember discovering my research related to kind of bridges and kind of the kind of crazy commercial transportation is just the fact that there was so much there's so much commercial shipping on the Chicago River that the bridges were kind of constantly being like raised, like to accommodate the ship traffic. And so the wealthier people at the time, this is like, late 1800s, they settled on like Prairie Avenue because they wouldn't have to kind of cross the river, to get to home. They could go from like, their loop office to their like fancy mansion on Prairie Avenue without having to like wait for that ship traffic, because it was like a constant nuisance for people.
That totally, again, now you hear that story, that totally makes sense, because I'd always wonder why the hell is it so far removed from like, like the Gold Coast and stuff like that. But the Gold Coast wasn't really the Gold Coast until, a certain period of time.
Yeah, that was later, definitely, like post-fire, that it really kind of became more of a wealthy hangout.
So in the book is fantastic. I really do love it, and I love how you even have a picture of the chain Gunter's. Say it again for me.
Gunter's chain.
Gunter's chain.
Yeah.
To like the primitive like structures of the area back then, from like the indigenous folks that lived here, the Potawatomis. You have some of those different homes laid out. And you have it all the way until now, right? And I think a lot of people hear of the Chicago bungalow and they think that's what all the houses are bungalows, and they're not. And you guys go into the different kinds. So my question to you is, what did you find like the most odd for all of this research that you've done in these different like time periods of different buildings? Was there a time where you were like, wow, these houses these are like the very few of these houses in the city that are still around today?
In terms of odd, you mean like a trend or something that sort of went through, or like an unexpected sort of thing that shaped a building?
Either one, but I would even say, like just like a type of house, excuse me, a type of house that there's not much of them. It's very little of that like housing stock that was a thing for a hot minute, but the fire happened and then they changed all this or that, something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I think like there's very few examples of like Greek revival homes. Like one of the best examples and most famous is the Clark Ford home, but like that was kind of a super popular style in like the 1820s, 1830s.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the fire and it just, that style was just like completely obliterated. You know, there's some evidence of some mansions of the Greek revival style that were lost in Chicago, but it's interesting because you go to, you know, some other cities, especially in the Northeast, that, you know, weren't obliterated by fire, and you see like a lot of stately homes uh, in that Greek revival style that were built around that time. And I, you know, really looked for it, but you know, again, there's like very little pre-fire like residential architecture. They're out there, and not all of them are known, but you know, they're very tough to find. And yeah, that kind of like pre-fire style is like, yeah, super rare.
Yeah, I think also there was very little Gothic revival. There's very little Second Empire, but I'm always more drawn to the later stuff because you went through World War II and the Art Moderne homes. I'm like sort of obsessed with, and there are so few of them. And Deco, there's very few single family Deco examples in the city, but it's because especially modern, it was like the last style before the depression hit,
Mm-hmm.
so they were just like eking them out a little bit and experimenting and figuring out how those could be sort of downsized, and boom, everything stopped. So
Yeah, you mentioned the Second Empire, and I think that's kind of an interesting style, like for Chicago, because that style was kind of like peaking in the 1860s and 1870s. And so that was very much like, you can go to Cincinnati and see like a lot of great examples of that. And they're really distinguished by the mansard roof. That's like kind of a little bit of a sloping roof on the top. Usually it's the third floor. It's like Paris has kind of made that style famous. But in Chicago, like a lot of that style was demolished in the fire, was burned up in the fire. And then in 1871, you can still read they were kind of like discussing in a few places like how a mansard roof is just like kind of the worst thing to have, like when there's a fire, because it's just so hard to get to. It's like a structure of wood, kind of like far up. And so, when Chicago was rebuilt, they kind of decided to like abandon that style. And so as a result, there's just like very few remaining styles. Whereas if you go to some other cities, you can find like a lot of that from the 1870s.
Well, in Chicago, also with the fire and other things, that kind of set the precedent of how houses were to be built, and then they would go and run with that for a while, like especially after the fire, right?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, okay.
There's like
Stops and starts.
there's like this sort of this mythology that after the fire everything was built with brick, with masonry, and that's not really what happened. You had like a few years after the fire, they were still building frame homes. Things just kept setting on fire over and over again, but there wasn't a lot of
Just
sort
want
of
to learn a lesson.
push, to do things. Also, there was a lot of like, this is Chicago, as you say. It's like, hey, so we want to still build a frame. Like there's like wheeling and dealing for certain areas and developers. But also, the biggest part was like we annexed like a huge amount of land and like doubled the city in 1889. And so many people were building frame homes like just outside of the city, Chicago proper, because they could, but still be in proximity. So when we absorbed all of that, of course, like we had a huge number of frame homes that were built later. But there was a lot of things sort of shaped housing after that. In terms of, well, I don't want to get too ahead of anything, but, fire codes did eventually catch up. I'll say that. And then, I sort of focused more on the 1910s and 20s and sort of the reforms that happened there. Probably the most interesting part for me. But yes, things did change eventually around fire codes. Same with New York. They also were dragging things around for way too long that way, and people kept dying and dying, So
I think one of the things kind of we found very interesting was just how like the fire codes just happened in like very much fits and starts. Like the kind of common story you hear in Chicago is like the fire happened, and then they banned frame homes, and
Yeah,
that was it.
exactly. That's like the
But it was
lore.
Mhm.
like,
It's like
as
we
Carla
are a
mentioned,
proud city of this adoption.
Yeah.
right. But
Yeah.
as Carla mentioned, like politically, it was really hard to like get some groups on board because it was like it was a much cheaper way to build your home. But then we found that even in these kind of suburbs that were later annexed, like they had their own fire codes in some ways,
Mm.
and some of these like townships, like Hyde Park and Lakeview, like used kind of some fire codes as like a zoning, uh,
Interesting.
process to kind of like keep out the riffraff. Like they were like, okay, let's keep this street nice, and so let's ban shoddy frame homes from popping up.
Really?
So yeah, and then eventually it got to the point where the city kind of had enough muscle and annexed the surrounding land to kind of keep pushing that fire code out and out, and then actually like
Mhm.
enforcing it with some muscle to the point that like, okay, from then on, like the homes are going to be brick, masonry homes.
Yeah, I live in an area of the city that was not part of Chicago up until that big annexation, where the now oldest house in Chicago, that's what they argue, the Crippen House up in Norwood Park,
Oh yeah.
is, and that's a lot of it's a wood frame house, right? That's what we were talking about. They were doing their own thing. They bragged that in Norwood Park, there's a street where back then you can stand on that street, and I forget the name of the intersection.
Mm.
But it's high enough because it's on a ridge where they said that you can see the Chicago fire happening and burning. That's how
Mm.
far away, to give like context of how far it is away. But I always thought it was interesting, you were talking about, you know, all the townships doing their own thing. Norwood Park was for sure doing its own thing because it was like a suburb.
Mhm.
It was a place where people would go to like vacation, like Lakeview very much was back in the day. So it's
Right.
fascinating to hear all of it now, because now it's all like under one of these, cohesive umbrellas of the city of Chicago. But man, oh man, there's just um, so much building that happened, especially with like the big apartment complexes. I read about something in
Mm.
particular that I didn't even know about, the Mecca building, and how important that was, at least to that area of the city. Though, do you guys want to just share a little bit about that one?
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you want
Want
to
to take that?
add some? Either way.
Yeah.
So Mecca Flats, I think, was 1891. Really controversial up till its demolition by IIT, but in the 50s, I believe. But it was sort of the first. It was like the first courtyard apartment building in Chicago. It was very experimental. It had a closed atrium, which was a little different than how we think of
Uh-huh.
courtyard apartment buildings now. But there was some sort of. I really super got into courtyard apartment buildings. I live in one actually. So
I
maybe that's
I
part
used
of
to
it.
live in one too, in like
Yeah.
Walcott Village.
Yeah, they're they're really wonderful, and
Yeah.
I didn't know anything, well, not much about them going into the book actually, and so there's always these experimental. I think that was built for the World's Fair, Mecca Flats,
Yeah. Mhm.
but there were these a few like iterations along the way, but they didn't really take off until like 1910s and 20s, and they really came out of um, uh, social reforms, basically tenement reforms specifically. So you had like Jane Addams, like she did some huge survey with other reformers, 1903 or something, where so much was being looked at in terms of our tenement homes here. And tenement homes in Chicago at the time were not like the tenements we think of, like the New York tenements, which are like these, like a huge building with a million apartments in it. They were oftentimes just like frame homes that had been carved up in a million ways. So there
Mm.
were all of these rooms that had no windows, and obviously bathrooms were outside. Everything was really pretty horrible in terms of all of like cholera and everything that was sort of hitting the city. So you had all these reforms happening. You had the Jungle come out in 1906,
Yeah.
and that caught some attention, obviously. So basically, these reforms, what they did was give a literal roadmap of like, okay, in order for these places to be sanitary, like we also were learning about germs and stuff at the time, right? So you had
Yeah.
like, we need light and air and all of these things. So, so I think that there's 25% of a lot has to be green space with a courtyard apartment building. There has to be a certain amount of glazing, a certain amount of windows and doors, all of these things. And so it's interesting to just see like how architects like took this information and then made a whole new building form, essentially. Like you had some early experimentation around this stuff, but after the reforms in the early 20th century, like really that's what made our courtyard apartment buildings look the way they do today. And they're so wonderful. And there's also all kinds of stuff around like single family home ownership and sort of emulating the number of entrances and front yards and all of this other stuff. And morality is tied to single family home ownership. So there's like this, you're more moral living in a courtyard apartment building than some of these other kind of multi-unit buildings, like all this crazy stuff that goes into it. You don't really think about, but it was really, really fun to research as a result.
Yeah, the Mecca in particular, I was just reading about it. I didn't realize all the history with it, with the musicians.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, after the World's Fair, all these musicians, poets, they were all in there, and people would talk about, you know, the sounds coming from the courtyard and how that became a thing. And like, oh, of course we tore it down to make progress for something else.
Right.
University was the worst.
Is there like a unicorn building that in your research that you guys did were like, why did we tear it down? What were we thinking? Did you see something that popped up on there?
God, so many.
That's a great question.
I've been working in preservation for 20 years, and it's like working in hospice care, I say at times, because it's like you're trying to save things that are constantly being destroyed. The unicorn building, gosh, why is that a hard one? Bill, I'll let you go first.
I mean, what's going through my head are just like all these recent homes that, you know, like I see on social media that are being demolished.
Yeah.
Man,
I know. I'm so in housing mode right now.
Yeah.
I've looked at, I've always wondered, or I've done this to myself, where not necessarily homes, but like buildings, you know, like the original City Hall of Chicago or the Chicago Auditorium. I think that was called on the South Side on Halsted Street. Was it called the Auditorium or not the, it's where like Led Zeppelin played back in the day. And there used to be a stockyard inside of there. It looks so cool on the outside.
Oh, I think, are you talking about the Chicago Coliseum?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, yeah. That is a cool one. That's a good poll. Because like, I love that because it's, as I recall, it's like Juliet limestone.
Yeah,
It's kind of got that look, kind of like the Stockyard Gate. And I believe, wasn't it where roller derby was invented?
Yeah.
Was it?
Like Chicago has so much random history like that. It's ridiculous.
I love that.
Yeah,
it really
like
is.
I think it was an early stadium for, I think the Bulls, or maybe like a progenitor of the Bulls. Or
yeah,
something.
it was the Bulls before they played, which is weird because the Chicago Stadium is old, right? Or the original Chicago Stadium was really old as well.
Yeah,
predated the Bulls basketball, but for some reason they were playing on the South Side, and then they moved over to the West Side.
Yeah, I mean that would be good. I mean, also, yeah, some of the early ballparks as well. I mean, like the original Comiskey and some of like the Cubs, you know, ballparks go way back. Like there was one along the lakefront. I mean, that would have been, they were much more rudimentary then, but those would have been like a cool piece of history to keep.
Oh, for sure. Or the one that's like the West Side grounds where like UIC is now, the medical campus and all that stuff.
That was brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, I could talk to you guys forever, and I know you got things to do today, but I'll ask you one last question. In your research and looking through all these different eras of building, is there one that stands out in particular, like either the type of house or the neighborhood that the house is in, that is just so utterly unique? If you are a fan of any of this history, you have to go and see it in person.
I'm in mid-century mode now. So I'm like obsessed with this one street. Oh my gosh, what's it called? It's like if you're driving down Foster, going west towards the expressway, there are all of these ranch houses, but they're like these weird flat ranch houses that are totally unique. Also, sorry, I'm only going to give mid-century, even though the book doesn't get into mid-century.
It's all good.
But there is a neighborhood. There's two neighborhoods. One is, I think it's part of Calumet Heights, that is pristine ranch houses, like boomerang, amazing, so gorgeous. I think it's primarily like long-term Black ownership of most of the homes, just to the nines, incredible. And there's another one like that right next to Avalon Park.
I
Um,
love Avalon Park.
I love Avalon Park too. I
There,
did a district there. It's incredible. But what
yeah,
is
there's
it?
Marinook is one of the neighborhoods
That's
within.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mary Nook. Mary Nook.
Marinook. Yeah,
Yes.
there it is.
I stumbled on that when I was doing a National Register district, and it was all focused on first 3 decades of 20th century. And then I was like, like, what is this magical place? And it's
Right?
not on the grid. It
No.
does a departure from the grid, which is always so fascinating in Chicago. But yeah, so many of these neighborhoods. And Avalon Park too is one of those places that used to be on stilts. I mean, it was like the houses were on stilts originally until the land was bought up and developed, which is incredible to think about.
Because it was marshy land, right? It would
Right,
flood.
right. Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that either about the city, that it was really, really not great to build on.
No, it was a really
Right.
big deal to get sidewalks and curbs and all of that once they started developing those sort of, more Western areas. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Phil, what about you?
Yeah, I think like if you're a fan of workers' cottages, I think like a neighborhood like Bridgeport
Oh,
or
yeah.
like McKinley Park are fantastic just because there's like such a great density of them. And then, Bridgeport in particular is like one of those neighborhoods where you can see a lot of like the sunken homes, like the
Mhm.
sunken workers' cottages, and just a lot of them kind of kept some of their original details. And yeah, I think they're fascinating. Just, yeah, incredible place to see them.
Mhm.
I agree. And there's so much more that people can discover within the book, Chicago Homes. Carla and Phil, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. I know the book came out like last year. Do you have any events coming up in the foreseeable future where people can chat with you guys about the book or anything like that?
A lot.
Oh, okay, good.
Actually, I'm happy to send some of them are sort of closed events. Let me see what was even going on. So Phil is unfortunately no longer in Chicago, but we're doing an online one for Glessner House in August
Mhm.
13th at 7 p.m. So I believe anybody can go to that. I'm doing a Chicago Public Library series on it.
Oh, cool.
There's June 23rd, July 22nd, and August 12th. Highland Park Public Library on May 28th. There's a bunch. Edgewater Historical Society I'll be at on May 2nd. There's a bunch, so I'm happy to send you the ones that are public. If there's a way
Sure.
to include that or something. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I'm just going to
And is there a website people can? Yeah, is there a website people can go to just follow you guys, or either individually or together?
I was going to put a sheet together to just post on my social media page on my Instagram, which is CT Bruni, CTBRUNI. So I'll do that, and this is going to light a fire under me to do it. So, instead of doing individually, that they kind of keep rolling in. But yeah, if people want to go and look there. And Phil, if you want to plug your website too.
Yeah, my website is wondercitystudio.com. And then I have an Instagram, which is wonder_city_studio. And then I'll like reshare anything that Carla shares about events, stuff like that coming up, even if I'm not able to make it.
Awesome. Well, thank you both very much. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Thanks for
Tom.
having us.
Super fun.